Marc Rosenberg. Welcome to Airline Profits Executive Interviews. How are you doing today?
I'm fine. It's a nice summer day in Toronto, and I'm looking forward to enjoying a bit of sunshine when we're done talking.
Wonderful. So can you briefly tell our listeners about who you are, what you do, and especially how you became involved in the airline industry?
You know, I started at the age of 12. I walked from my uncle's place in Montreal to Dorval Airport. I had a Brownie camera. I went on the observation deck, which is something that doesn't exist these days. Took pictures of aircraft. The most memorable was a Northeast Airlines aircraft going to Boston, and proceeded to collect airline timetables. I was so fascinated by it that I wrote Airlines, subscribed to a British publication called Airplane and Commercial Aviation News. And while my friends could talk about hockey players and football players and yesterday's scores, I could look up in the sky and tell you that's the BA flight coming in from London. So the interest became quite passionate. And by the age of 16, I had a travel column in the Toronto Star called The Young Traveler, where I wrote about what it's like to be a student traveling. Unfortunately, the tourist boards always had Rolls-Royce tour guided limousines waiting for me to show me, especially in London. So I learned the truth about media then. My interest was really to work for an airline. My first summer job was with an airline called Transglobe Airways. It was a British charter company. And I worked as a passenger agent at the airport. And I had the audacity of putting seat numbers on seat covers because they didn't have any system to identify the rows and the seat numbers. And we had given all these passengers boarding cards telling them where to sit. Well, apparently when the aircraft came to London, all heck broke loose because I cost them 150 headsets that they couldn't reuse again. But we did get the flight out on time. Air Canada hired me as a summer student in reservations, and then every summer while I attended university, they had me in different marketing roles. It was quite clear that I was going to work with them full time. Unfortunately, they had one of their many management freezes. So I started off as an in-charge flight attendant, and I actually flew the line for a year, which I have to tell you is a wonderful experience when you're young, 21-year-old single male. When I finally got into management, as management opened up, I went through many different roles at Air Canada over the years: passenger, cargo, marketing, operations. I kept getting promoted as time went on. Eventually ended up in Miami, heading up the Americas, specifically US, Caribbean, Latin America, sales and operations. And then I became all sales. Came back to Toronto, where at some point I became president of the subsidiary Galileo Canada, which is now called Travelport. Went on to be president of Air Canada Vacations, took on the role of sales as a VP, which was about a 12-year role until I retired in 2008. And during that time, I led the team that really broke the distribution GDS model. I was a bit young to retire, but it was time for me. I think I had about 40 years at that time of Air Canada calendar service, some 37 years full time.
Okay.
And my wife threw me out of the house when she realized I was sitting home in my pajamas at 11 in the morning. So I started a consultancy called Strata Connects, focused on GDS contracts, sales organization reviews. I became chairman and moderator at many airline conferences. And here we are. I lectured for IATA. Recently, I've done training of a foreign airlines sales team in the US. So I'm sort of a jack of all trades in the airline business with all commercial focus.
I see. Well, quite an extensive experience there in the industry. So you're a very seasoned veteran, and especially with when it comes to sales. Now, airline profits, and there are no profits without sales, right? So what exactly would you say is the primary role of an airline sales organization, and how does it differ from other departments within an airline?
Well, a properly organized sales force is a B2B relationship. Sales organizations and airlines don't deal with consumers, individual consumers. And that's something that a lot of people don't understand. I remember my daughter, one of them, being interviewed for medical school, and they asked her, "What does your father do?" And she said, "He sells tickets." And I said to her, actually, I do, but the sales organization is B2B. And the way I define B2B, first of all, it's business clients, and I define it in three different categories. They're buyers, and you think of them as corporate companies, governments. They put out RFPs. They manage, and we call them manage account. They manage their travel. Then there are the sellers, and we all know sellers as travel agents, but very much like other retailers, you've got global, like an American Express or a Carlson Wagon Lee, where they're all over the world. You have national travel sellers, you have regional, and then you have local mas and pas, and you have specialty ones. Some sell cruises only, some do hiking trips only, bird watching, etc. That's one group. And finally, the third group I refer to are resellers. And we know them as tour operators, cruise companies, vacation houses, consolidators. And these are organizations that buy or contract normally low fares, low yielding fares, so that they can bundle it into whatever else they're selling. So you often can buy a cruise that includes air. That's all been pre-contracted and determined by the cruise companies. So the focus of a sales organization is and should be B2B, but then the question becomes, how do they do it profitably for an airline?
Okay, I see. Now, that means that the sales organization should be focusing on generating profitable revenue for the airline. Could you elaborate on why this focus is so crucial for an airline's success?
Well, if you ask anybody in sales and say, how relevant are you to the airline's profit? And they'll tell you, well, we generate most of the revenue. Well, that's not true. And I'm the one who has to tell them as a sales guy, you have to understand that there are many factors that influence revenue generation, including schedule, price, product quality, frequency, reputation in the market, frequent flyer program, and the list goes on. And those have a major influence on how revenue is acquired. The difference of the sales organization, if they're properly focused, is to acquire incremental revenue. That incremental revenue is determined by marketing as to where and when they want additional traffic. And so if you can focus your organization in sales to do that, to understand the data, to understand who the buyers are, who the sellers and the consolidators come resellers are, you have a much better chance of contributing to the bottom line. And that I consider the profitable revenue, because you've targeted that revenue to get to bottom line profit.
I see. Now, you mentioned earlier that there are three types of business clients who are buyers, sellers, and resellers, which apply both to passenger and cargo sales. Can you explain the significance of each type and how they impact the overall sales strategy of an airline?
For sure. There's very little difference, first of all, between passenger and cargo when it comes to B2B relationships. Both in the buyer segment focus on corporations, banks, mining, insurance companies, tech companies, and governments, because governments have travel portfolios. All of these organizations contract They put out for RFP their air travel, and the airlines bid on contracts to be assigned preferred carrier status. And the greatest majority of them, by the way, use the sellers, the travel agents, because no one airline can satisfy all the destinations, the hotels, the car, the travel insurance. There's much more to buying an airline ticket than the airline seat. So the TMCs, as I call them, those are the ones that tend to deal with corporate accounts, are involved. When a buyer puts out a contract, let's say they do $20 million worth of business, your airline may be eligible for half of that because the other half are routes you don't fly to. If your sales team acquires the contract, you will get on a $20 million account, of which 10 million is eligible, you will likely contract $8 million. So, and it's usually high yield, preferred rates, quality traffic over high frequency routes or long haul routes. The sellers, on the other hand, the travel agents, being all sizes, shapes, have preferred programs with the airlines where they're incentivized to sell more. However, within their mix of clients, they have buyers, they have individuals who prefer certain airlines, usually FFP driven, and then they have the general public buying vacation, leisure, cheapest fares, etc. Hypothetically, if they did $50 million of business, they really can't influence a high percent of that 50 million. They can't prefer and insist on all their clients flying on the airline that is paying that travel agency the highest commission. So park that number, and then you go to the resellers. The resellers, as I mentioned earlier, are companies, leisure companies, tour operators, tour wholesalers, sports organizations, and consolidators who, if you're not familiar, tend to sell what we call gray market tickets legally. And they sell them to agents that are not appointed, IATA, etc. They also contract with the airlines, always focus on low fares. And so you either have the contract with them or you don't have a contract. When you go through your data, and sales data is so critical to understand, to know who your clients are, where they're selling, what kind of fares they're selling in terms of yield, and seasonality. So if a consolidator come reseller is only buying you in the peak summer on the transatlantic, you know, you have to question if you really need them, because summer travel on the Atlantic is very high. The fares are competitive and they're low. Why would you give them an additional incentive to sell seats that you're going to be able to sell regardless? So I call it the swing factor. And with some airlines, it varies as to how much is buyer, how much is seller, reseller. But when you go through a formula based on the data, you usually find that the business account that delivers the highest revenue to you is not your most important client, because they have minimal swing factor capability. It's usually somebody in the buyer category, and secondly, in the reseller category. So it's strategic thinking using data, targeting markets and seasonality. I recall we had one, we'll call them travel agency. I won't name them and I won't tell you where they were, but they had a relationship with us and a competing airline, and they kept pushing for higher incentives. And when I finally asked the sales team to peel the onion, tell me when is it that they sell us and what kind of fares, they were selling us during the peak summer at the lowest fares we had. And during the off-peak, when our load factors were lower, we had more seats available, they were selling a competitor. You look at that and you go, that's not who I want to do business with, right?
Yeah.
Most airlines miss this opportunity of understanding.
Okay, I see. Thank you very much for shedding some light on that. Now, when it comes to determining an airline's most important business customers, and you just touched briefly on that, what criteria are used in the evaluation for that?
So it comes back again to what are they buying or selling, on what routes, what fare types, and when, and what potential is there for you to swing that business through contracting or providing them incentives or any other resources to get that business. So when the government of Canada, which has a huge travel department, puts out an RFP, they tell you by route, city pair, frequency, et cetera, all the data you need. They do that in conjunction with their preferred travel agents. And you, the airline, now have to determine what is it that you're prepared to do to give them the right incentives, contracts, et cetera, to win the business over, and therefore they become either 1, 2, 3, whatever on your list of key accounts. So
I
you
see.
have airlines that will say, I have all these business accounts that are 50, 100 million, whatever is relative to your airline. And rather than understand and peeling what we call the onion to know what these accounts are about, they simply assign resources based on the total number they see, not understanding that that total number may have very little swing factor in your favor.
I see. Quite interesting. Now, sales and marketing are very often misaligned. It's a challenge in many industries. So, from your perspective, why do you think this misalignment occurs? And what strategies can be used to improve the collaboration between these two critical functions?
Let me share with you my own experience. When revenue was in and up and higher than predicted or on target, marketing would always take the credit. When revenue was coming in below target and we weren't making our numbers, it was sales' fault. They weren't doing their job. So that's a starting point of the breakdown in relationship. Both organizations use data, similar data. However, they interpret the data quite differently. Your marketing group is driven by load factor, yield, and performance on a route. Your sales organization is driven by the business accounts increase in revenue, and if you're sophisticated enough, against the targets you've established with them. So we're talking two different languages, sales and marketing. And some people will say to you, the sales organization sets prices because they're always giving it away. Well, that's actually not true. Sales prices, fares, are determined by marketing based on what they perceive as what the market will bear. You have an example, for example, in marketing where they were looking at a route, a new route, and they look at all the statistics and the data, and they determine there's a potential there based on the numbers of flown passengers between point A and B. 90% of airline new route development never go to sales and say to them, can you tell us about the clients that sell this route between point A and B? And I remember in one incident, the airline was very focused on what they perceived as a high market daily DC-9 at the time service to a particular city in the US and started the service, and the results were a disaster. Why? Because had they asked sales, we would have told them That market is dominated by three major corporate accounts. They have deals with global deals with US carriers. They will never give us the business, even if we're nonstop, even if we're half price. So there's what I call a disconnect in an understanding of how marketing can benefit from sales organization input before decisions are made. And there's also needs to be an understanding by sales of why it is you can't just put prices in the market because you think it's going to buy you business. You can walk away from business at certain times of the year. It's just not worth it. The airline can sell it on its own. So I've always been a proponent of creating a management team that consists of sales and revenue management pricing that sit together and discuss all of these things and determine what is the priority and where do we go. In my world, I encourage my salespeople to take jobs in marketing as analysts, etc., to get the experience so when they came back to sales, they had a broader view and picture of the reason why things happen the way they happen.
I see. Yeah, I think that's a brilliant idea, because if everyone sits in their own corner, they don't necessarily know what's happening on the other corner. So it's
right. And you know, the sales team is motivated by reaching targets, and some salespeople will give it away just to make their numbers. And that's very wrong. It goes back to selling for profit. I'd rather you sell for profit and not make your target than tell me you brought in millions of dollars during the summer on the Atlantic when I don't have enough seats to satisfy the market. I don't need that business.
I see. Thank you very much, Marc. Any final thoughts before we end this interview?
Well, I think, contrary to popular belief of many people, the sales organization should not be schmoozers, although that is a role. They shouldn't be golfers, although that is a role. Face to the market, interact with your clients, get to know what's going on in the market, especially competitively. If a sales organization was designed to manage the buyers, sellers, resellers, understand them from a global perspective, understand them from a regional root significance and importance, you would have a very different outcome, and you would not need the number of salespeople that a lot of airlines have. Just because you're flying to a new city, it doesn't mean you need a sales organization. If you know who the buyers, sellers, resellers are, you can have them handled elsewhere. So in my work these days, I spend a lot of time with an airline, peeling the onion, get the data, understand the three channels, and let's talk about what is the most effective way to get the business. And the business is there to be had.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Marc Rosenberg, for sharing your thoughts and insights into airline sales with us today. And it's been a pleasure having you on the show. And I hope we'll be able to invite you back in the future to get more insights.
I would welcome that opportunity. As you know, I do a lot of GDS contract negotiations, and that's a whole different world and a whole different dynamic. So with that, thank you, and I wish you a great summer day.
Thank you very much, Marc.
Bye-bye.
Bye.